Hey y'all, if you are returning to my channel, welcome back, and if you're new, welcome aboard. Today is another Disney history and trivia video slash weird Disney. Today we're going to talk about everyone's favorite trip through Norway, Maelstrom. I contemplated whether to put this in weird Disney or Disney history and trivia because if you have been on the Maelstrom attraction, it's not the most cohesive piece of work that Disney has ever put forth, but some of it makes sense. So I think it's just going to be a regular history and trivia video, and as we go through the history, you'll kind of understand like how it came to be the way that it was. Maelstrom was in the Norway Pavilion at Epcot in Disney World. So the attraction didn't open with Epcot. Epcot opened in 1982, and when Epcot opened, there were 9 pavilions that had countries in them. Norway was not one of them yet. Norway and Morocco were actually the ones that were missing, but they had plans for there to be a Scandinavian pavilion, and it was kind of, they were working on it. They thought it was going to be Denmark, and then they were like, you know what, let's make it all of Scandinavia. But then only Norway was actually able to produce the funding necessary to like have their country represented in Epcot. So that's how we got to have Norway. But they knew in the late 80s that they wanted to have some more thrilling attractions at Epcot, and they were like, this new pavilion that they started working on in like 86, they were like, this is the perfect place to put this. So they started building the pavilion, and they were like, we're gonna have this attraction. We want it to be a water ride. We want it to be all about like mythical Norse mythology and folklore and all of this cool stuff. Like, look at all these trolls and, you know, the Norse gods, and there's all this cool stuff. We're gonna have the Rainbow Bridge to Valhalla. It's gonna be Vikings and trolls, and it's gonna be magnificent. And that was actually the idea going into it. They were gonna call it Sea Venture, and they kept that idea for kind of a while. You can actually find pictures where the Sea Venture sign actually went up, but they had to make some changes. The investors from Norway, who were the ones who were investing, you know, the people who actually provided the funding for Norway to have this pavilion, they didn't want it to be all folklore and mythology and all of that kind of stuff. They were like, yeah, that's kind of a thing that we do, but like, can we talk about what we actually have? Like some things that might draw people to Norway. Yeah, there's some Vikings and trolls and stuff, like that's a thing, but we've also got polar bears, and we've got oil rigs, and we've got maritime travelers. So Disney said, heard ya, we'll put all that in there. So that's kind of how we got that convoluted mess, lovable mess that was Maelstrom. And kind of along with this change, the Living Seas had just recently opened at Epcot as well. What is now the Seas with Nemo and Friends. It used to be the Living Seas, and because Living Seas, Sea Venture, people who don't know where they're actually going, they didn't want people to get confused thinking that one of those was at the other place. So they changed the name to Maelstrom because that was going along with that thrilling whirlpool of excitement that they wanted it to be. But it didn't quite get there. They wanted it to be thrilling, and they had some great ideas for this, but it didn't quite work out. Let me just, for those of you who did not ever have the opportunity, it's worth a watch on YouTube. Just search for POV and just experience that for a second. So you start off at the loading dock, and there's this big mural that shows like all these different aspects of Norwegian culture, you know, theoretically some of the stuff that you're going to see throughout the attraction. It's got some sailor kind of people and some oil rig people, some Vikings over there, and you're like, okay, like we're gonna go on a trip through Norway, got it. And you pull off, and immediately you start going up a lift hill in the pitch black with only one thing glowing at you, and that's one of Odin's eyes, and that thing creeped me out to no end. You go up this lift hill, and he's telling you that you're going to experience Norway. You level out at the top of this lift hill, and you see some Vikings. You see some maritime, like, travelers, some traders and stuff, and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm seeing it. The Vikings, the long ships, the boats, that's a thing in Norway, got it, cool. And then you see some trolls. There's a 3-headed troll that's real mean and nasty, and he's like putting a curse on you. And then there's this other one that's kind of cute, but kind of terrifying as well. He pops up out of the water, and they put a curse on you, and they send you back, over the falls. Disappear, disappear. And the magic lights up the sky, and then you're shooting backwards, and you suddenly are in the Arctic, I guess. You're seeing polar bears and little puffins. These animals, and this was what the landscape looked like before humans were there. And as you come out of that, That's where you see, when you're out in the pavilion, you see the boat like back up over the falls, and you're like, oh, what is that? What is that? And then it goes forward again. That's where you're at. There's another troll, and I guess he does something and makes you come back forward again. So here is where we have reached the maximum thrill factor of Maelstrom. We are gonna have a drop. Praise, we're gonna have a drop. Every good flume ride needs a drop, right? But the drop is only like 20-something feet, like 28 feet. So it's not real steep, and it's not real, it's kind of a long, it's kind of a gradual descent, but it is a drop. And to up the thrill factor, I guess they wanted to end it with a bang. They wanted to have, as you come down this hill, you are in the last show scene, and the last show scene is the oil rig. And that's kind of an impressive thing when you come down the hill and there's just this gigantic oil rig, and you see another one kind of off in the distance, but you're basically like underneath an oil rig, and it's kind of scary, which was kind of woo, like that's thrilling, that's exciting. But at the beginning, they wanted it to be that you were coming down this hill into a storm. So you're in this storm on the seas, and they were gonna have wind effects and rain effects, and there was gonna be splashing and wind, and they wanted to have an active Tesla coil in the attraction to simulate lightning. They have promo materials from this from Imagineering. You can find the pictures online. I'll see if I can find one and insert it here. That's from Walt Disney Imagineering. So like, they had this planned. I don't believe it ever actually was in effect. I believe the only lightning effects that were ever actually utilized for guests were strobe effects. But this was a thing that they wanted to do, and I guess at some point they realized electricity, guests in water, perhaps not. I'm sure that it was going to be safe. I don't think Disney was going to ever intentionally try to fry people, but it just seems like a bad idea, and they opted not to go with that. But that, when they decided not to do it, that cut the thrill factor down by like a lot. No longer were they gonna have this like massive storm. You just have a troll, and he sends you down a little hill, you glide out into an oil rig, and then you're done. Then you show back up at this maritime little shipping sea village, and that's it. You unload, and that was the ride. It was like Imagineering heard their suggestions. They said, you said polar bears? Cool, put that in there. What else? Trolls. I love it. Put the trolls in there. A couple different types of trolls. Yeah, we're feeling that too. And you know what? While we're at it, Vikings. Absolutely. This was actually a two-part attraction back in the late 80s, early 90s when it opened. It was the ride, and then you would be funneled into a post-show. Normally you have the pre-show, you know, like at Dinosaur you've got Seeker with Hell all over there. And you have to do the pre-show every single time before you can go to the attraction. Well, this is a post-show that you had to do every single time you went to the attraction. You would go into this room, this auditorium, and there was like a 5 or 6 minute video that was called Spirit of Norway, and you had to watch it. Like, they didn't have a way for you to exit, except for you went into this theater, watched the show, and then left from there. There was nothing wrong with the video. It was a nice video, showed a lot of the present day culture and the people in the 80s. And they didn't really change the video. They didn't update it. So if you had seen it once, you had seen it. And if you were seeing it later than 1988, you were like, when was this filmed? Did they film this on a toaster? People who were going on the attraction later or had already been on the attraction before, they didn't love having to watch the video over and over and over. Which, you know, we put up with pre-shows because we are going to do the attraction. But can you imagine if you had done the attraction already and then you're like, okay, now I have to do this thing again. The sponsors who sponsored the Norwegian Pavilion, they were companies, they were investors from companies in Norway, and they didn't want to re-up the contract. They decided not to continue sponsoring, which gave the Norwegian government the opportunity to sponsor. So they did that for a few years, and then once they decided to no longer sponsor, then it became Disney's responsibility to fund the entire pavilion, to maintain it and fund it. Was completely on Disney. So they were like, well, we'll do what we want. The Imagineers did decide to make that video optional. It was a major push from the Norwegian companies that were sponsoring to have that video as a travelogue, basically, of like, hey, come visit us. But since they were no longer sponsoring, Disney was like, well, we don't have to do this anymore. Let's make this the most enjoyable we can for the guests. We're still going to have it because some people still may want to watch it, but we're going to make it optional now. So that was when they started having the doors open. When you get off the boats, you can go in there. You can either sit down or you can continue walking all the way through and exit through the gift shop. So that was how it was every time that I ever went. It was open and you could just walk through, and then at some point they would go ahead and close the doors and show the show. But you had the opportunity to choose whether or not you wanted to do that. A couple of the firsts, it was really hard to not mention these with like the history of it because these feel like part of the history, but they are firsts. This was the first dark ride at Disney that had audio animatronics. So those trolls and those Vikings and those polar bears and everything, those were some of the first audio animatronics that were in a dark ride. This is classified technically as a dark ride, but it's also a flume ride, and it was the first backwards one. So that was the first backwards attraction at Disney, I do believe, before, you know, Everest came. So that was the first, you know, that was something new and exciting. So that did, I guess, add to the thrill factor. We'll give 0.5 on that. We'll up the thrill a little bit for the backwards element because that was something new and exciting. But my very favorite first for this entire thing is this was one of the first things that Joe Rohde worked on at Disney. And you know Joe Rohde from basically everything in Animal Kingdom, but he is that magnificent earringed man who has given us so many wonderful attractions, and this was one of the first things that he worked on. He went to Norway and did a whole bunch of research on the culture and the architecture and everything in order to bring us the Norwegian Pavilion. So next time you are in the Norwegian Pavilion, think of Joe Rohde. Couple of the little fun facts. Like I mentioned, this did become Frozen Ever After, and the ride paths are basically the same. I will insert the photos here of the ride paths, pretty much exactly the same. There's a little bit of a difference at the load station, little curvature there, but for the most part the ride path remained exactly the same, and they just took out the trolls and the polar bears and added some snowmen. My family took a trip one year, I want to say it was in '09 was the year that we decided that like that trip we were devoted to finding hidden Mickeys. So I gotta go through my pictures and see if I can find the pictures that we took here, but there is a guy wearing Mickey ears on one of the Viking ships in that mural at the very beginning at the load station. It's a guy wearing Mickey ears, and that's one of my favorite hidden Mickeys in all of Disney property, and it's no longer there. So wanted to make sure to mention it in this video. So that's it for the history and trivia and fun facts part of it. I did want to throw in a little mini story time at the end here because Maelstrom is like very close to my family's heart. We joke about it a lot for a couple of reasons. So if you were just here for the history and trivia, hope you enjoyed. But if you want to hear my family little stories real quick, that's the rest of what I'm doing. So my mom wanted to ride Maelstrom when they went to Disney in August of 1992. She could not ride it because I was born in September of 1992. So she was extraordinarily pregnant when they were at Disney. Can't think of anything I'd rather do less. I would not want to be 8 months pregnant at Epcot in August, but you know, anyway, she wanted to ride Maelstrom, and it said that, you know, there was thrilling things and drops and pregnant women should not ride. So my mother waited until we finally went back to the parks in like 97 or 8 was the first time that I can remember going to the parks. I don't think we went to Epcot on those trips because I was really young and my sister was even younger. So I don't think we went to Epcot until I was probably almost a teenager, which means my mom waited like 12 or 13 years probably to go on Maelstrom, and she didn't know anything about it. She didn't, you know, we didn't have YouTube at that point, so she was like, I have to go on this ride. I didn't get to go on it back in 92. I want to go on this ride. I want to see what it's about. I want to see what is so thrilling. And we got off and we were like, Mom, did that meet every one of your expectations? So we always went on Maelstrom after that. It became like a family, not really even a joke, like we genuinely liked it because it was so funny that my mom waited forever and a half to ride it. So we always went on Maelstrom for my mom. And the other thing is, you remember that video, The Spirit of Norway? Well, the auditorium where it plays, they have these really cool looking chairs. So I remember when we went to Maelstrom the first time, I saw these chairs and I was like, look at that. Look at the backs on those. I bet that feels good. And I wanted to go over to them and like baloo on the tree, like rub my back across it. I was like, I bet this feels good. So I went over and I sat down. Well, we were at like the tail end of the group coming in. And because I wanted to sit on the chairs and test them out, we got stuck watching the video. It was just the doors were open. You could come in and sit down, which we did, and didn't leave. The chairs were pretty comfortable. So that's it for today, guys. Hope you enjoyed the Maelstrom history and trivia. Evidently, that was the time. I don't know how long I've been rambling, but my camera decided that it was too long for one clip, so it stopped. What was I saying? Oh, if there are attractions or movies or anything that you would like to hear more about for history and trivia or Weird Disney or anything like that, let me know what your suggestions are down below, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye, y'all. See, that's all I had to do. That was all I needed. I needed 27 seconds.